Hi, welcome back to Software Analysis and Design. Your computer is working perfectly fine. Yes, I did add a little bit of background music. So you can let me know if you like that, if that is just not a great idea. What it is binaural beats. So binaural beats of alpha waves, to be specific. This is some very relaxing music that is supposed to help your brain get into an alpha wave state, which is a state where your memory can get accessed very easily, and so you're gonna just soak up that new knowledge. And it works best if you put in headphones, so you may want to consider that. And with that, we're gonna jump into a module today of Agile Development and Modeling. I hope you're as excited as I am, because it's some cool stuff. First of all, let's check in though. How's your weekend been? How's your week been going? How are you? How present are you right this moment? How grounded do you feel? Are you like somewhere stuck up here in your head and you're like, oh, just gotta get this one lecture over with? Or do you feel you're really present in your body, you're connected to the ground and to where you are? That does have a really, really big impact on your learning experience. So take a deep breath and then just connect with where you're sitting or standing or laying. Just connect with the surface underneath you and feel how you're grounding. Become super present behind your eyes. Yes, good. Now you're ready. Let's dive in. So today, what's on the menu for you is recommending Agile in a couple of readings that I pulled out for you. Those are new, so don't worry, you didn't miss anything. I did not tell you ahead to go ahead and read those, but I'm recommending them now. And then we'll dive into the Agile Manifesto and a little bit about Agile Modeling. And then we'll look at a few Agile process models like Scrum and XP, and some further examples of where we can make use of Agile principles. And of course, I always got a couple of exercises for you. So let's do it. My new recommendations for reading are 3 IEEE Software articles. And the first one is called The Risks of Agile Software Development. And that was a study that has been reported on. And then the other 2 are titled Agility, Risk, and Uncertainty. And it's a 2-part article, but 2 short ones, I promise, that report from one particular software architect's point of view. So for the first one, the risks of Agile software development, that one has a study of 28 organizations where they evaluated 112 people and they found out about what are the key risks in Agile software development. And we see here a couple of different risk categories. One is in development and deployment, and the other one is in project management. And there are several types of risks. And then in the middle column, you see the number of organizations that was experiencing those risks. And then on the right, you see how the organizations predominantly dealt with those risks. So let's check a little bit. Development and deployment. So there is a risk of technical debt because Agile goes ahead and starts developing, and then sometimes you take the quick route first and you don't always go back and fix everything. So there is a risk of that. And then there's also separation of development and IT operations. So because development is so rapid, IT operations kind of is at the other end, and that can sometimes lead to trouble. And another risk is that in new Agile software development teams that are not as used yet and as experienced in practicing this, there is an increased risk of defects. On the project management side, there is a number of unstandardized project management tools that can sometimes lead to trouble, and there's a lack of knowledge retention. Like, yeah, you can fairly quickly go through a project and then like, oh, we didn't write things down so much, so where did they go? And right now, we're not going to dive deeper into each of those risks. You can hit pause and read in detail through that table. I'm not going to read every single one of them out to you, because in case you are not as familiar yet with the Agile principles, it doesn't make sense to dive deeper into them before we have really talked about them. But because the reading section is first, I just wanted to throw that out there, that this is something you may want to come back to. I thought it was a super interesting article. Number 2, agility, risk, and uncertainty. Designing an agile architecture. So Michael Waterman, who is a solution architect at Specialized Architecture Services in New Zealand, wrote up what the main tactics are for designing agile architecture and the impacts of those tactics. So first tactic, keep design simple, because that increases modifiability and it also reduces the upfront design effort. Second tactic, prove the architecture with code iteratively, also increases modifiability, also reduces upfront effort. Use good design practices, also increases modifiability. Doesn't really reduce the upfront design effort, but that's okay. We want to use good practices anyways. Delay decision making, that can increase the tolerance to change, and it also reduces the upfront design effort because we're not taking the decision yet. And then the tactic plan for options is also to increase the tolerance to change, and it does not decrease the upfront design effort because it's part of the good design practices. That said, it doesn't necessarily cost you more time either, or more effort. So that article has a part 1 and a part 2, and I recommend looking through both of them. The main design habit that we return to for this module is experts focus on the essence. The Agile Design Manifesto is a super concise piece of writing that we'll get to in a second, and it's very much about focusing on the essence. Let's take a look. Here it is. The Manifesto for Agile Software Development is now almost 20 years old. Oh my God, it's been so long. Oh dear, that tells me how long I've been out of university. Well, I'm still at university, just on the other side of the classroom, but okay. So in that manifesto, there were a number of very experienced software developers. Their names, you can find them on the bottom of the slide, starting with Ken Beck. You've heard his name before, and then Alistair Coburn. He showed up in our lecture on use cases, and you may recognize a few of the other names as well. They came together and stated, we are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we have come to value individuals and interaction over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. That is, while there is value in the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. Now, after this Agile Manifesto came around, there were a lot of people who just ignored those last 2 lines. They were like, all right, working software it is, no more documentation. But that's not really what the manifesto says. The manifesto says we value the things on the right, we think the things on the left are more important. In parentheses, that's why they are written in a larger font size. Shenanigans. So that makes sure that, yes, we still have to use processes and tools. We still need documentation. We still need to negotiate contracts, and we still need to follow a plan. That said, the things on the left, individuals and interactions, working software, customer collaboration, and responding to change are even more important. And how did this come about? Well, where it came from is a general dissatisfaction with the items on the right because they were done in overhead. There was too much of that. So there was a dissatisfaction with those overheads involved in software design methods in the 1980s and in the 1990s, because the 80s and 90s were really big on establishing these giant process models, and everybody was happy that we had it all figured out from 1968, where the first NATO conference on software engineering happened, to the 1980s and 1990s. We were like, oh, it's not chaos any longer. We totally got this. We're going to structure this to the last point, and then we'll always know what we're doing. And things became really stuck, and things became really slow in moving forward. The whole design process was slowed down by tons of specifications and documentation and too many contract iterations. And so that led to the creation of agile methods, because they focus on the code rather than on the design. They are based on an iterative approach to software development, instead of we can specify and write it all down at the start and then it's just continuing from there until we're done with the implementation and testing. And they're intended to deliver quick working software and evolve that software quickly to meet changing requirements, because we know requirements often change for a variety of reasons. Either the markets have changed, or the customer has changed their opinion, or some new side constraint came up, or we simply didn't foresee that a specific idea would not work and we'd have to change our approach. Now, the aim of agile methods is to reduce overheads in the software process, for example, by limiting, not getting rid of, but limiting documentation, and to be able to respond quickly to changing requirements without excessive rework. Boom. Now you know where it came from and why it's good. What we need to look into a little more is, what does agile development now mean? Like, how do I put that in place? I get those 4 principles. That sounds like a good idea to value these things. Now, how do we do that? So in Agile, program specification, design, and implementation are interleaved. The system is developed as a series of versions or increments with stakeholders involved in version specification and evaluation. So we'll always include our customer directly. We'll talk to them every week if possible. And we will frequently deliver new versions for them to evaluate and say, oh, perfect, this works great, let's continue in that direction, or say, oh, you know what, this is not really the way to go, we need to change something here. And then there is extensive tool support, for example, automated testing tools that can support development and make it go more smoothly. Finally, minimal documentation. So we focus on the working code. Now, what that means, if we focus on the working code and do minimal documentation, that means your documentation standards, like the way how you do it, has to be really high quality, because otherwise you leave everybody in the dust who wasn't along with that original development. Good. Now, as this is a class about design and not about extreme programming, the question is, how does that tie in with what we do in this course? How does that tie in with the analysis and design part and with modeling? Because that's what we do in this course. We model a lot of things. We model them from the analysis perspective, and we model them from the design perspective. So Agile modeling, what is that? Agile modeling is a practice-based methodology for effective modeling and documentation of software-based systems. It was put together in the years following the Agile Manifesto, so in the early 2000s. As you can see, this figure by Scott is copyrighted from 2001 to 2006. I'd assume he still holds the copyright. That said, it's right there. We're talking about his version of explaining Agile modeling. Simply put, Agile modeling is a collection of values, principles, and practices for modeling software that can be applied on a software development project in an effective and lightweight manner. And the values that he speaks about are communication, simplicity, feedback, courage, and humility. Now you may think, why do we need to write down values for how we model software? Because these values determine how we collaborate in a team. And teamwork works best if you agree on a common set of underlying values. If you're taking this course at the university, then you signed a team agreement at the beginning of the semester saying how you want to do your teamwork and what are your underlying commitments. Those are based on values. The keys to modeling success are to have effective communication between all project stakeholders, first value, to strive to develop the simplest solution possible that meets all of your needs. There's the simplicity, which also ties into the design habit, focus on the essence. To obtain feedback regarding your efforts often and early, so that feedback loop is super important, because the earlier we catch mistakes, the quicker we'll be able to resolve them and the less they cost us. To have the courage to make and stick to your decisions. So especially in Agile development, because we focus on early versions of the product, we need to take design decisions very early on and just try them out. We take one decision, try it out. If it doesn't work, well, then we'll have to go back to the humility part, the fifth value, to admit that we may not know everything. And others have value to add to our project effort, which means that route failed, we're going to try another one. And so Agile modeling can enhance different other software processes. There can be different ones at the bottom. So you see that there can be a software-based process, and not all of these are Agile. Like the rational unified process, for example, is not traditionally Agile. It could be made Agile, and then you can use those principles and practices and add some other techniques to that, specific ones. Sweet. With that, what does that look like on a day-to-day basis? So in iteration 0, we have an initial requirements envisioning in a matter of days and an initial architecture envisioning also in a matter of days, where we identify the high-level scope, identify an initial requirements stack, and identify an architectural vision. Good. And then we go into the development iterations. So you see 3 iterations at the bottom just for this example. And modeling is part of the iteration planning effort. We do need to model enough to give good estimates, and we need to plan the work for the iteration. We need to work through specific issues in a just-in-time manner. The stakeholders actively participate in what we do, and requirements evolve throughout the project. We expect that. That's kind of part of the plan. And we model just enough for now. We can always come back later. And then we develop working software via a test-first approach, and the details are captured in the form of executable specifications. Good. So iteration modeling, model storming. Instead of brainstorming, we'll model storming, and then test-driven development. And then we do reviews on that throughout all the iterations. And then there's a set of activities that can support all of this. And best practices of those are test-driven development, just-in-time model storming, active stakeholder participation, prioritized requirements envisioning, architecture envisioning, look-ahead modeling, iteration modeling, just barely good enough, all of that, executable specifications, documenting late, multiple models, documenting continuously, and single source information. So we don't want to have to update information in 3 places if something changes. Those are the core practices of Agile modeling. Interestingly enough, these practices can be applied to most development projects, most software development projects for sure. So a project team doesn't need to apply all of the practices, principles, and values of Agile modeling to benefit from it, and the project team doesn't even have to follow an Agile process model in the first place. you could still benefit just from these best practices and activities. With that, if there is so much that we can take from Agile practices and apply in other types of projects even, maybe it's worth looking deeper into it. And there's a ton of free resources out on the web that you can look into for this. And what I just came across today, which I think is super cool, was tweeted by the Agile Alliance. They have a number of webcasts that are freely available to the community. And yes, you're part of the community because you're watching this video, and therefore you gotta be at least minimally interested in this. And the next one that's coming up is on April 23rd, how to implement testing in Agile in a company. And there's another one on April 29, which is innovation by sharing, how your company can benefit by reaching out. I know that this slide is going to be out of date in a little more than a week. That said, agilealliance.org/webcasts, that will always be updated. So just please check it out and look what's coming up next, and maybe you can learn from that. Maybe it's of interest. How's that music working? Are you still on it? You still present? You still here? Cool. Good. Let's dive into the most exciting part, I believe, which is let's talk about Scrum. Scrum is one of the process models that we use to develop Agile. It's a framework. Lots and lots of colorful stick figures. Let's make our way through this diagram, because once you've understood this, you pretty much got it. We're going to break it down over the next slides as well. So at the beginning, we have a product owner who gets inputs from executives, from team, from stakeholders, customers, and users. And the product owner passes that information on to the team. That information is documented in a product backlog. So everything that should go into the product in a ranked list of what is required in terms of features and stories. Remember the user stories from a few weeks ago? That goes into the product backlog. Prioritized means the most important stuff comes first, the nice to haves come later. In the meeting with the team, the so-called sprint planning meeting, we can talk about the feature creation, where the team selects, starting at the top, as much as it can commit to deliver by the end of the sprint. And that goes into the sprint backlog. So in the sprint backlog, we have written down what of the product backlog, of this product backlog, can go into this first sprint. So maybe our product backlog has enough stuff to fill 4 or 5 sprints, and we're just gonna start here at the beginning. So everything the inputs and executives said goes into here, and then we divide it up. And then there may be more input later depending on the review cycles, and then that can just keep filling and keep getting prioritized and feeds into the next sprints. So we're now at the first sprint. Task breakout goes into the sprint backlog, and then we have a 1 to 4 week sprint, depending on how the company likes to run this. The sprint end date and the team deliverable do not change. So this is where the agility becomes a little more fixed for that particular short time frame. We have a Scrum Master who oversees the sprints and makes sure that the Burndown charts or burn-up charts, depending on preferred terminology, get taken care of. Every 24 hours, we have a daily Scrum meeting with the team and the Scrum Master. And then at the end of the sprint, we go through a sprint review. We deliver the finished work to the customer, and we get their feedback. And then we do a sprint retrospective. Yes, and then the sprint retrospective is where we look at what can we do better, and where can we improve, and what already did go well in this iteration. So in a little more detail, the Agile Scrum framework is a framework based on the Agile principles. It's a framework that handles simple, complicated, and complex software development. So there are very, very large software systems that have been developed using this one. And Scrum is based on continuous improvement in product and process. Scrum delivers software frequently, it delivers value, and it showcases the hidden problems in system development. In a Scrum project, we move forward with a series of iterations called sprints, and each sprint size is typically 2 to 4 weeks long. It is based on inspection and an adaptive cycle, and we work on the product incrementally and iteratively, which reduces the risks and enhances the visibility of the product in the making. It has a few simple roles, activities, and artifacts that we're going to look at. Roles: product owner, Scrum Master, and team. The product owner is the client's representative who defines the features of the product, who decides on the release date and content, and the priorities, who prioritizes the features according to the market value. It's also the one responsible for the profitability of the product and accepts or rejects work items. The Scrum Master is on the development side. He's the coach for the Scrum team, enacts the Scrum values, ensures the team's productivity, builds a winning team. How do you build a winning team? Well, you figure out who has which strengths in your developer team and put it together such that you have some complementary skills and characteristics, but enough homogeneity to be able to work together. So the more heterogeneous your teams are at the beginning, the harder it's sometimes to get rolling, but then the better you complement each other over time. Whereas teams that are very homogeneous, they may roll off very easily, and then it turns out over time they're lacking certain capacities. So you want to find the golden middle for a winning team. And then the Scrum Master is responsible for applying the Agile principles and making the system effective. The team is usually 4 to 9 members, developers and testers. It is self-organizing and it's highly performant. They build a winning product, they work collaboratively and share responsibilities, and it's a cross-functional team. What does that mean? Well, that means today I'm a requirements engineer and tomorrow I might be the tester. And on day number 3, I might be part of the development team, part of the implementers. The activities that they'll go through are sprint planning, daily Scrum meetings, sprint reviewing, sprint retrospective, and product backlog refinement. In the sprint planning, the goal is for the team to plan and agree on backlog items that they can complete and confirm the tasks required to support acceptance. Who does that? Who's involved? The Scrum team, the Scrum Master, and the product owner. And we'll do that at the beginning of the sprint. Usually about 4 hours for a 2-week sprint. It's done in 2 parts. First part is define what needs to be done, and second, plan how to achieve that goal. The inputs are priorities, the product backlog, acceptance criteria, and capacity of the team. And the outputs are the sprint goal, the sprint backlog, the tasks, and the estimates that go along with the tasks, the Burndown Chart, which we'll get to in a little, the definition of done, DOD, and the development plan and strategy. The DOD, the definition of done, is a way of writing down when we know we will successfully have completed that sprint. So for example, definition of done is if I can actually buy a book in that web shop by the end of the 2 weeks. That could be a definition of done. So what happens in that process? The product owner presents the backlog items in priority order for review. Then we review and clarify user backlogs, items, and stories. We break down larger stories and each of the stories into tasks and acceptance criteria. You remember that from the user story module. Tasks are estimated in hours by the team. How do you estimate your hours? When you have something coming at you in terms of development, when somebody asks you to program something for them, to develop something, or when your professor says, could you develop this design specification that has these and that many diagrams and an architecture breakdown? Task estimation, time estimation is a bit of a rough one. It grows with experience, and it's really hard if you don't have a lot of experience under your belt yet. That said, there are a couple of rules of thumb that you can follow. The most important one is, as a beginner, add 50% to the time than what you think you're going to need. This actually applies all across life. And I read this in a book a few years ago, and it is really frustrating because I was thinking to myself, like, how do I always take longer for the things that I thought I was going to get done? And it's a shortcut that we take in our brains. So when we plan to get something done, say, get a presentation ready, we estimate, say, 2 hours. Seems reasonable. But then it takes us 3, and we're exhausted by the end of it. So what happened? The thing is, our brain always goes with the optimum case. If I've ever walked to the office in 20 minutes, from there on, I will in my head always think it's going to take me 20 minutes to walk to the office. Independent of that day, I was just full of energy, I had nothing to carry, and all the lights were green. It'll always take 20 minutes in my head. And that means most of the time I'm going to end up rushing to make it there on time, because sometimes the lights are not green. Sometimes I have to carry a heavy backpack. Sometimes I just don't have much energy. Whatever it is. So we always go with that best case in our estimation. And if we don't add 50% for all the statistics that tell us there are things that are not going to go as planned, then we'll always be behind. So for everything you do this week, when you plan it, add 50% more time and then see if that actually helps you get things done on time. Just do a self-experiment. No harm. I did it with myself for a few weeks in a row, and it is shockingly accurate. Right now, I've been sliding off it a bit, which is why I'm frustrated with not being able to accomplish all the things in time that I thought I was going to get done. But there we go. I have to reapply the rule. All right. End of my lengthy side note on time planning. The developers and the testers get assigned to their tasks for the specific sprint, and then the process continues until all available hours are used for the sprint. The output of the sprint planning is then backlog, estimated tasks, etc. After that, we go to the daily Scrum meetings. So the goal for those is plan for the day, inspect and adapt daily towards reaching the sprint goal. Participants are the Scrum team and the Scrum Master, and we'll do that daily throughout the sprint. 15 minutes maximum. So I'm not going to have time to tell you a lengthy story about the bug that I couldn't find yesterday. I can tell you the summary and what my status is and what my next steps are, that's all. So the team members form a group to focus on a daily plan and discuss the issues faced the day before. Input are current status, risks, and done work. Output are the plan for the day and the tasks to work on. So this happens by physically standing up for 15 minutes in a circle and talking on only those 3 points per person. What did I do since the last daily Scrum meeting? What am I planning to work on today? And what are any issues or blockers that could impede me from reaching where I want to get to today? The Scrum Master protects the team and facilitates for being effective. So if somebody starts going off on a side rant, they'll rein them back in. And that gives an opportunity to the team to inspect and adapt daily adapt to the sprint goal on a daily basis. In our sprint review, remember at the end of our sprint, the goal is to get feedback on product development, to inspect and adapt on the product feature, And participants are the Scrum team, the Scrum Master, product owner, and stakeholders. So this is going to happen on the last day of the sprint. That's where everybody gets together, 2 hours in a 2-week sprint. So we're going to demonstrate the working product to all. Nope, we don't have to meet physically. We can also meet online. We can use another Zoom. The sprint goal is 100% done in stories. The definition of done should be reached and the acceptance criteria should be fulfilled. So output would then be acceptance and feedback on the demonstrated stories. During this meeting, the team demonstrates 100% completed work and the Scrum Master facilitates the environment. In case any changes or new requests come in, the product owner notes and updates the product backlog as required. And finally, the product owner makes decisions on the acceptance of the sprint. What's the one left? Oh yeah, improvement of the process. So the sprint retrospective, what a complicated word. The goal for the sprint retrospective is to inspect and adapt to become more effective and efficient on process, people, and cultural aspects. Who is it done by? The Scrum team. So participation is decided by the Scrum team on invite basis if they want to ask anybody else. For example, if we know we have a cultural thing going on because we have a new team member from a very different background and we have trouble integrating them, maybe somebody else can help who is also from that same culture or who is from yet another culture or somebody who's just a culture expert. This is also done during the last day of the sprint, 2 hours for a 2-week sprint, usually after the sprint review. It's a closed room discussion of observed patterns and desired results and improvements. Inputs are observations, issues, experiences, patterns in behavior that have been identified, recommendations, feedback, and just information. Outputs are lists of activities, steps, and suggestions that help to make the team more effective and efficient, and action items for the team. So how it works, participation in the discussion. Like it's just about being active in the discussion, about inspecting your own team and adapting to upcoming challenges as a team. So the Scrum Master brings in the culture of openness, trust, and respect as people discuss improvement areas, as the Scrum Master facilitates and focuses on the improvement and the changes instead of pointing fingers at others. And this is a platform for the Scrum Master to help the team resolve ineffectiveness in the system as in the systematic development. So inspecting and adapting, that's what it's about. Try everything that makes sense, reject things that didn't work, even after repeated trials, shape your culture, process, and practice. And hopefully by the end of that, you'll have a more effective and a happier team. And happier will also make more effective. Okay, with that, we are through the activities. So what's next? What have we not talked about? Oh, the artifacts. Yes. So what are the deliverables that come out of this? Oops, we're getting there. There was one more activity. Product backlog refinement. My bad. So the goal is to keep the product backlog items ready. Uncertainty to certainty. Who is participating? The Scrum team, Scrum Master, and product owner. When? Continuously in the process. Can be done in between sprints and 1 to 3 hours, depending on the team's need, when we get back to it. So we add the priorities of the items per business value, which means the feature that adds the highest business value comes first, which also shows you some of the deficits, which is why one of the big risks is technical debt in Agile development, because the business value is time delayed with technical debt. Like fixing stuff underneath that is not so visible on the surface often gets pushed back until it bites you. that's technical debt until it bites you. So we add, remove, and modify existing product backlogs to achieve a release scope to get to our next goal. We identify and discuss risks. We look at dependencies and other uncertain items in the acceptance criteria. Input are the release strategy, priorities, product backlog, and dependencies and risks. Output are product backlog items that are 100% ready for future sprints. And the description of how this is carried out is the product owner provides clarity on each product backlog item. So all uncertainty gets re-clarified into certainty. All questions get clarified. The product owner updates the product backlog. 100%, gotta be really present and involve all the team members for that. The team understands, carefully listens to the needs of the product owner, and understands the acceptance criteria. Team helps the product owner to reorder the backlog. Okay, so we gotta create and refine, we gotta estimate, and we gotta prioritize. Now we get to the artifacts, like first one, the product backlog. And then we also have the sprint backlog and the product increment. The product backlog has an ordered list of ideas for the product, which can come from the product owner, team members, or stakeholders. So on the first slide, I said the product owner feeds in that information. The information originally often comes from other stakeholders, and team members may also have good ideas because they know what kind of technical debt they are incurring as they try out certain things during the development when they're not 100% sure yet whether that's the solution that's going to be a fit. For each product backlog item, we have a description and an estimate of effort. And the product backlog is ordered to maximize the value delivered by the Scrum team, and the team work comes from the product backlog and from nowhere else. If it's not in the product backlog, it's not happening. Every feature, enhancement, bug fix, documentation requirement, every bit of work the team does comes from a product backlog item. The product backlog may begin as a large or a short list, and it typically begins short and then becomes longer and more defined as time goes on. The product backlog items slated for implementation soon will be refined next, which means they will be further clarified, as in that last step that we just discussed, and split into smaller chunks. Though the product owner is responsible for maintaining the product backlog, the development team helps produce and update it. Now, what you see in the must-have, nice-to-have, and won't-have is one example of a very simple product backlog, but you get the idea. For each of those items, each of those little blue boxes, there needs to be a description and an estimate of effort. So there's a user story, there are acceptance criteria, and estimates of effort. Out of this product backlog, we get the sprint backlog. So refined product backlog items chosen for the development in the current sprint, together with the team's plan for accomplishing the work. And it reflects the team's forecast of what amount of work can be completed within the sprint at hand. Once the sprint backlog is established, the development team begins to work on the new product increment. And that product increment is the third and last artifact. Every sprint produces a product increment. It's the most important Scrum artifact because we value working software over extensive documentation, remember? A product increment is the goal line for each sprint, and at the end of the sprint, it must be of high enough quality to be given to end users. It meets the Scrum team's current definition of done, the DoD, and it must be acceptable to the product owner. So every sprint, you have a working product at the end. We have two more little tools that help us with keeping an overview of our information radiators, if you will. Those are task boards and burndown charts. Task boards allow for transparency. They display what the life status is of the team in a certain work area. A super simple one is here on the right. You have the user stories, you have the tasks to do, you have work in progress, and you have done. And that's the status options. There are different formats for this. There are many companies who work with a physical board. A physical board has kind of a haptic satisfaction to it. If you work a lot on a computer and you are a more haptic person, then maybe it is frustrating to you that at the end of the day, you didn't see anything that came out of your computer. So if you have a physical Scrum board where you can just move your items along, that may be a little helpful. I know for me it helps. It works. It's just more satisfying. There are also a lot of digital versions, which obviously have the advantage of you can share them in a distributed team. You don't have to be physically at the same location, which is the reason why many of us now have electronic calendars, so we can easily share those items and all that stuff. So same for task boards. The team designs their best version of the board. So it's not so much about having the best standard structure, it's about having the structure that works best for the team so they can self-organize. And then we have the Burndown Chart. The Burndown Chart shows you how much we have to do and how much we already got done for the current sprint, and also for the entire sprint backlog against time. So we understand with every day how many of those little tasks we got done. On the left, we have a percentage of what remains to be done. On the right, we have the time, and the percentage that remains to be done is sometimes also represented by the tickets or by the items or by the sprint backlog items, the number of those. And this Burndown chart gets updated by the team regularly and continuously. And independent of the work, it represents the total remaining estimated time to market to achieve the sprint goal and also overall project goals. And you know, if you are over that Burndown chart line, your project is late. Means you don't have as many items done yet as you were supposed to at that point in time. If you deliver quicker, if you are able to get your to-dos done quicker than what was estimated, then you'd be advancing the project and delivering early. We know from some of the other software lectures that there is more of a tendency to be late in the Burndown chart than to be early. That said, one of the reasons for that is because we're notoriously bad in estimating time. So remember that 50% extra rule. I can look up the reference. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but it's a fairly well-known psychological rule. And it works. It really does. Now, I mentioned physical Scrum board is only going to work if you are in the same location. So what if we need to distribute this? For distributed Scrum, the Scrum Master should be easy to reach for the team. Like, they gotta be around for the everyday problems. The product owner should visit the developers and try to establish a good relationship with them. It is essential that they trust each other. So it would still be good if they could meet in person, just because, you know, people are people and we bond with people. And this is a lot harder over a Zoom meeting. I'm not saying it can't be done. It's just that we have to establish good practices for that, and maybe we can still get better at this. Real-time communications between team members for informal communication is super important, particularly instant messaging and video calls. So that should always be there. Slack anyone? There's also a ton of other options. Continuous integration so that all team members can be aware of the state of the product at any time. And then definitely common tools. We need a common development environment for all teams, and video conferencing between product owner and development team. So those are pretty much your 6 success factors for distributed Scrum. And it's not easy. It is often easier to physically be in the same location, and with, you know, current work models and pandemics around the globe and travel restrictions, and also trying to take care of family and kids and having long commutes. Like, there are so many reasons for why distributed may make more sense. We just need to readjust. There are a ton of free resources on Scrum. If you look at scrumalliance.org/agile/SEU-resources, then you see quite a few free virtual Agile courses about virtual Agile teams, about an introduction to Agile marketing, software processes, design thinking, coaching, program management office, and so on and so forth. And then there is a number of Agile webinars about remote work. There we go, distributed teams again. How do we do this remotely? What about Agile management? And is the Scrum Master a servant leader or more of a secretary? So go check those out. Take a little deeper dive from the people who have been doing this in industry for a long time, and get their digest on it. We will contrast with one other Agile software development process, and that is extreme programming. Extreme programming was one of the early ones that came up right after the Agile Manifesto, or along with it. And you see on the right side that there are really, really short loops here. If we're talking iterative, it can't get any shorter than that. Seconds, wow. So there is a seconds long feedback loop in pair programming. There is a minutes long feedback loop via unit testing. There's an hours long feedback loop in stand-up meeting pair negotiation. There is a day long feedback loop in acceptance tests, and there is a weeks long iterative loop in iteration plans, and there's a months long feedback loop for release planning. So there's a lot of iteration going on. Extreme programming is a variation of the Agile software development methodology based on 5 values that we've heard about for Agile modeling: simplicity, communication, feedback, respect, and courage. Extreme programming features small teams of developers, managers, and customers who work closely together during short development cycles. So in extreme programming, we're looking at even shorter cycles. It's usually just 1 or 2 weeks instead of 4-week sprints. And it promotes the use of simple designs and practices and frequent small releases. If you've ever tried pair programming, you've gotten a taste of it. If you haven't tried pair programming, I really encourage you to try it out, because it is a super intense practice. It drives some people nuts. It is great for others. So I'm curious about your experience of it. Feel free to leave a comment. Now, on a couple of terms that are really important in extreme programming: iteration. Yep, it's all about the iterations. So in software development, a single self-contained phase of a product's overall development cycle, typically lasting 1 to 3 weeks, in which one aspect of the product is addressed from beginning to end before moving on to the next phase of development. Pair programming, an Agile software development practice in which 2 programmers work together at the same time and share a single workstation. So I used to do this a few years ago when I was learning, when I was working with functional programming with some XML stuff. We needed to crunch some XML documents and bring them into a different format to import them to create some automotive models. And I was working with one other person at the time, and we would need a schedule. We would like work on it for a while and then be like, all right, every 50 minutes, like we got to take a few minutes break, get a cup of something to drink, go to the bathroom, and then do another round, because it's so intense as you continuously stare on the screen, the both of you. Like, you can't pull out your mobile phone and start getting distracted. You can't quickly check your email in between, because guess what? Your buddy is sitting at your side looking at the same programming problem that you have. So it is highly effective, and for that reason it can also be really draining unless you schedule your breaks really well. Releases, the version of a software system or other product made available to customers or the act of making that version available. So we have super frequent releases in this one as well, every 1 to 3 weeks. And then we have the stories, same as in Scrum. So description of requirements by project stakeholders as a story that is used by the developers to determine project timeframes and schedules. And then last but not least, the unit test is really important. The process of testing an individual's component of a larger software system. So as we pair program, we develop test cases along with it to make sure that our thing does what it's supposed to be before we push it towards the larger system. That way we don't introduce bugs from our little component into the larger surrounding system. Now, the question is, what's better, XP or Scrum? Maybe it's more what is more suitable. So Visual Paradigm compared those two, link at the bottom, in a number of different aspects and their practices. So for iteration length, the practice of whether to allow modifications of requirements. In XP, you can modify them every 1 to 2 weeks because their sprint cycles are shorter, and in Scrum every 2 to 4 weeks. How do you handle changes with an iteration? As in, whether the demand is strictly in accordance with the priority. If the customer calls and says, oh no, we have a really important change that we need to make right now, and we don't care if you're in the middle of a sprint. In XP, the requirement can be replaced with other requirements when a need is not implemented, but the implementation time is equal. In Scrum, you're not allowed to do this. Once the iteration is completed, no changes are allowed and the Scrum Master is strictly checked. Priority of features. So you check whether the demand is strictly in accordance with the priority. Yup. In XP, yes. In Scrum, no need to. Because that's how we feed it from the product backlog. Engineering practices. So whether to adopt strict engineering methods to ensure progress or quality. In XP, that's very strict. And in Scrum, that requires developers to be conscious of the practices, but it's not written down as strictly as an XP. Scrum doesn't do pair programming. They can integrate that. It's not necessarily always done that way. Good. Are those the only ones? No, they're certainly not. There are a lot of agile process models. There is Scrum, there is XP. Those are the ones we had. There is adaptive software development. There is, dynamic systems development method. There is Crystal. Alistair Coburn was involved in the development of that. There's feature-driven development. And there is Agile Modeling, which we came across briefly. There is the Agile Unified Process. Does that one ring a bell? Yup, it is based on the Rational Unified Process. So the one that originally led to the creation of UML. So if we're already modeling using UML, then maybe the Agile Unified Process is something good to look at. And then there is Lean Software Development, which we'll talk about a bit in the next module. There are a couple of other versions of how Agile principles are being made use of. I found this really cool visual note taker on Twitter who works in the Agile domain. She calls herself Sketching Scrum Master, I think. It's 2 slides down, her name. And in this sketch note, they documented a panel that talked about facilitating remote retrospectives. So remember sprint retrospectives? We talk about the sprint at the very end, what went well, what did not go well, and how can we do better next time? So this is part of the Agile Alliance work. And you see on the left the iteration, and you set the stage in the retrospective, and then you gather data, you generate insights, you decide what to do, and then you close it out. Those are generic steps, and now in a little more detail, for the setting the stage, it's really important to have a structure. So you want to do a check-in with every single person. It can be brief. People have met each other before. People have been working with each other all the time. So maybe we don't need an icebreaker. But check in with how people are doing. What has changed in your life maybe now that we've gone to completely remote meetings, where before we were sitting together in the same offices because of COVID-19. And when you do those check-ins, sometimes people start running off on tangents. So you got to keep a time tracker on them and try to make those sessions visually engaging. Yeah, it's voluntary if you have the video on or off. And we all know if I have a face in front of me that's moving, that's talking to me directly. By the way, this is why you have my little picture on the side of the slides, not because I'm so vain that I need to appear in all those videos, but I know it's actually going to help you engage with the content. So fuzzy hair day, don't matter. You got a face in front of you that is talking to you, and therefore it is hopefully a little easier for you to engage with what I'm saying. Same for those remote retrospective team meetings. So we're not going to make it mandatory to switch on the camera, and if you do, it'll certainly help the team. You can gather data asynchronously just before the meeting already, and there is also a lot of subjective data. So it's like, what do you think about this and that? And that may take some time. You may have to make phone calls before and check in with people individually and then bring it to the meeting. There is a lot of virtual activities that you could be doing. You can do polls via Zoom. You can do some screen sharing and share ideas. You can draw some stuff. You can use visual metaphors. And even for the retrospectives, especially if remote, it's important to make people feel safe about, hey, it's okay to not be perfect. We all make mistakes, and especially if we're trying to improve something, maybe we're not going to get it perfectly right in that next improvement. As long as it's going to help us getting better, we're fine. That's what we wanted. So it's important to get feedback and design for equal participation. That means if I know that I have people who have certain preferences in terms of their input modes, or people who just are not as quick in typing or are not as quick in expressing themselves, or people who tend to not take the stage so much unless specifically asked to, then I can embed that in my meeting culture. So that a little more specifically on one of the team atmosphere aspects of Agile practices. Found another interesting one about the domains of business agility. So this whole Agile paradigm does not only apply to software development practices, it also applies to how do we even do business. So the idea of using uncertainty as a competitive advantage is at the heart of business agility. The goal would be to try and serve humanity, as in serving individual humans by developing better products for them, so the human does not have to adapt to the customer, but the human does not have to adapt to the technology, but the technology actually gets better at adapting to the human. And that will require certain business agility in terms of leadership, in terms of individuals in the workforce taking responsibility for parts, and in terms of operations. So how can we optimize? How can we apply theories of constraints? And how can we optimize for our customers? And it matters what we measure. So if we continue to measure only the return on investment in terms of dollars, then we're just going to continue following a capitalistic system that does not necessarily serve humans with the best value. So the question is, what's our mindset in terms of how do we want to thrive as humanity? How do we want to live our lives? And how can we ensure that the world that we are creating with the products we're creating right now takes a turn for the better instead of for the worse? And I'm pretty confident that we can do this. I think there's a lot of perspective that can open up over time. And I think we can advance in sustainable practices. I believe that with every new generation that leaves university, there is more being done in terms of education, but also in terms of the personal development of all the students that come through. And I say students in a very wide term, maybe I should say learners instead. Like everybody who's willing to learn and grow as an individual contributes to making this world a better place. Third and last take on visual sketches for making use of Agile principles is the humans first approach here. So Craig Wing had this idea of reshaping business as an inside the perfect storm. This is a project from the Project Management Institute in South Africa. And the idea was at the Project Management Summit 2020 to learn from futurists. Futurists are the people who write books that tell us what the future is going to look like in 5, 10, or 20 years. And their methods are super, super interesting. So that's why I thought I'm going to throw this one in here as a stimulator for your ideas and thoughts. So what futurists do is backcasting. So they think of the future and then move backwards. For example, here you see 2037 on the calendar. So they imagine what the future is going to look like in 2037, and then they go backwards and say, well, what would have to happen for us to get to that future? What are the wild cards in that? So the grandparents still have Polaroid photos, and now they have mobile phones. And then we try to extrapolate from the current future and where we are today, and then understand, oh, market forces may be lower now with the pandemic. And what do we have to learn? What do we have to unlearn? And what do we have to relearn? So what's that unlearn business? If you want to learn something and your cup is already full, you're just going to go back to what you used to do. So some of the things that we know have not been working so well in the past, if we keep repeating the same approach, make more money, more economic growth as the solution, has that worked so well in the past? For some periods of time, yes, but it's also gotten us in a lot of trouble. So maybe that is not the maxim. Maybe we need to unlearn that and relearn what instead is the additional value creation. So open up from that more narrow lens of economic growth to what could be the value growth, the quality of life growth. And yes, finances are going to be a part of that to a certain extent, because we all need to eat, and we all need to be able to live somewhere. And there's more to it. So we're going to have a fourth industrial revolution, a fusion of new technology, physical, digital, biological, and that can lead to really interesting outcomes. And a couple of examples that we see here are like a Catholic confession app, very interesting example, an AI poster child. So there can be narrow AI, like we have it already, as an if statements, then general AI to transfer knowledge, and then super AI as in machines that are way more intelligent, like in Grady Booch's TED Talk that I referenced a couple of weeks ago and gave you the link to. And so with all of that, we see there are still a lot of businesses that are increasing their number of users. The kids that grow up now, they were born with the internet. Like the 6-year-old that I'm currently living with, he knows how to use an iPad way better than me. And the largest property company does not own any property. I'm referring to a tech company. You may know the one I'm talking about. So the question is, if we know we're in a time of a lot of change inside that perfect storm, as Craig says, and on average we have 4 job changes by the age of 32, how can we reshape businesses such that the human comes first? So I'm going to leave you with that and feel free to hit pause here and think about that for a little bit, what you can take away from that for yourself, and what an influence that could have on your career. So a little summary. Agile methods are incremental development methods that focus on rapid software development, frequent releases of the software, reducing process overheads by minimizing documentation and producing high-quality code. Agile development practices include user stories for system specification, frequent releases of the software, continuous software improvement, test-first development, customer participation in the development team, and then Scrum is an agile method that provides a project management framework. And many practical development methods are a mixture of plan-based and agile development. So next week, in the next lecture, we'll see that agile at scale, what does that look like? If a large company like IBM now wants to do agile and they're doing it, what does that look like if I have thousands of developers working together, agile? Well, that means I have Scrum teams here, and then a bunch of Scrum Masters getting together, and they are kind of the Scrum team for all that down here. And so it's got to become hierarchical to some extent. And how on earth can that work? So we'll look into that next time. For today, there's a couple of exercises that I would like you to do. The first one's called Personal Scrum. So how can you use some of that in your life? And there are two little prompts that I have for you. One is a TED Talk. Bruce Feiler, who's a project manager in software development, he used an agile management approach for his family at home to deal with a couple of things that they had coming up as challenges. And then there was another article on techbeacon.com about how you can manage your life using those agile principles. Second one is independent of the exact work that you do in your daily work now, how can you use those principles in your daily work? So you don't have to be a full-time software developer yet. You don't have to work in an agile environment to be able to make a use of these principles. So look at that article on planview.com and check out how you can use those agile principles in your daily work, no matter which environment you're in. And then third, I want you to reflect on how else you can possibly make use of that. If you think about those future sketch notes and that kind of thing, what other benefits can you take away from agile methods, from agile practices, and just from an open mindset around this? Let me know in the notes. Let me know in the comments. Any feedback you may have, let me know if this served you. Thanks.